Hey everyone, welcome to the July edition of the Radius Community Call. Very excited to be here and talking to you folks about some of the new updates and showing some demos. Couple of housekeeping items to get out the way before we jump into the main topics. We want to remind you that this call is for you. We're here to share the latest about Radius, what's happening behind the scenes, and what's upcoming. So please utilize the chat to ask any questions you might have related to Radius. And then if you have questions along the way, feel free to raise your hand. I don't mind the interruptions. Raise your hand and we can unmute you if you'd like to ask a question via voice. We'll also have a dedicated Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions that come up towards the end, we'll stick around. The Radius maintainers will stick around for a Q&A as well. Today's agenda, we have a couple of things. We'll, as always, share some of the new blog posts. We'll share some of the updates to our Radius roadmap, give a quick run through of everything that's been released as a part of v0.48. And I believe we need to recap 0.47 as well, since last month's community meeting was a bit of a special one and we had a special agenda. We didn't get to cover everything that was released. And then we'll jump into 2 demos. And then at the end, we'll reserve some time for some open Q&A with the Radius maintainers. And one more housekeeping item is that we wanted to share some places where you can go and engage with us in the community to stay up to date on everything Radius. Discord is your go-to place to ask questions and engage with the community. You can also receive release notes and community call invites by signing up to this Google group, which is basically an email list, and you'll get probably 2 emails per month, one for the community call invite and one for the release announcements. So it's a very minimal traffic email list if you like to join and stay connected. And then we created a LinkedIn account to add to our portfolio of socials a couple weeks back. So definitely check out our LinkedIn and give us a follow if you're so inclined. I'll run through a couple of blog posts that we've published since our last community call where we shared blog posts. 4 blog posts to be specific. We have one introducing the Radius resource types, which if you tuned into last month's community meeting, you might have saw Mark Rusinovich demo and speak to this very exciting new feature that just adds a lot more extensibility and customizability to Radius. So we're super excited about that. Feel free to drop into this link to check out the blog post. There's a couple of details in there and kind of pointers on how to get started using Radius resource types. So definitely check it out. And then a couple of other ones. We have one about deploying your applications to Azure container instances. So that was also released in the previous release, and that's available for you to go try out too. Feel free to check that out. And then we also have 2 blog posts centered on platform engineering type topics. So if you're curious about how to leverage Radius to in your engineering platforms, definitely check out these 2 blog posts as well. All right, so with that, we can run into some of the Radius roadmap updates. We're very pleased to share that since our last roadmap update in the previous community meeting, we have released 3 features. Super exciting, custom resource types, or radius resource types, as we're calling it now. This was if you missed last month's community call, I encourage you to check it out, the recording. That meeting was all about radius resource types and a deep dive with a demo of how to use radius resource types. So definitely check that out. We also have serverless container platform support now, specifically ACI support. We've built that into the Radius core code base, so you can actually use Radius to deploy to Kubernetes as a deployment target, and also you can target ACI as the alternative compute deployment target. And then the configurable gateway HTTP timeouts. This is something that someone in the community had contributed. Very cool feature, very useful feature for configuring like custom timeouts for HTTP calls in Gateway. This is especially useful in the context of like AI models or LLMs where you might need longer timeouts as you're waiting for a response from, let's say, a model or an API that's a little bit heavier. And then we also have a couple of changes. So first off, we are now proceeding from designing into implementation for 2 of the radius resource type feature enhancements. So specifically, we want to enable manual resource provisioning for radius resource types. So right now, you can only provision them using recipes. So we'll enable manual provisioning mode for those. And then another radius resource type enhancement is connections between all resource types. So we're actively building that. So you can connect not only containers to radius resource types, but then also connections between radius resource types. And then the one thing that we moved from developing into kind of a designing and evaluation phase is the external data store for Radius. So we want to bring PostgreSQL as the Radius data store. The community member had started working on this, but there's some kind of design edge cases that need a little bit more thinking. So we're moving that back into the designing phase, and they're going back to the drawing board for evaluating this. So stay tuned to see what the progress will be for adding Postgres as the Radius data store. And then with that, this is the new view, or the updated view rather, of our Radius roadmap. And as I mentioned before, there's a couple of things that we are now working on as well. We added compute platform extensibility. So this particular feature is very cool. It builds upon the work that we've done with Radius resource types, and we're now doing the work to make the Radius core resources extensible and implement them with resource types so that these resources, what previously were core resources and could not be customized via customized and deployed via recipes, we want to make those deployable and customizable via Radius resource types and recipes. So things like the core resources like core containers, core gateway, secret stores, volumes, we want to make all those implemented with Radius resource types, and you can essentially bring in your own recipes to power or implement those core resource types. And this would make expanding to other platforms beyond Kubernetes and ACI so much easier, because then all that expansion will be recipe driven, and we're hoping to get a lot more traction on expanding to support more compute platforms and more cloud platforms in the future as well. So yeah, super exciting, and that's currently in the developing phase. We've gone through iterations of design over the past month, and have arrived at an implementation that we are happy with and moving along with. So yeah, feel free to go check it out in the roadmap if you're interested, and feel free to comment on the work item itself to give us any feedback you might have. And then another thing that continues to be in progress is radius control plane upgrade. So we want to allow for in-place upgrades complete with a set of pre-flight checks and rollback in the case of like the upgrade failing. That's still ongoing, and we're hoping to announce the release of that feature in an upcoming community meeting soon. And then lastly, I want to talk about radius usability. So we've added a item into the designing phase called radius usability. And in this work item, we're tracking all the sort of like rough edges that radius might have in terms of usability, and then stack ranking those and targeting to fix some of those one by one. So this project is currently in the designing phase because we're scoping out, what the right priority for the paper cuts and edge cases would be, and then prioritizing that work accordingly. So also stay tuned for that as we make ground on that and make some usability improvements to the Radius project. And with that, I'll talk a bit about what's been released in version 47 and 48. First of all, as a part of the upgrades work, we implemented this small but useful fix into the rad CLI. So the rad version command now also displays the control plane version. So before, you might have noticed the rad version command only showed what the version of the CLI is, which is useful, but not as useful if you want to know what version of Radius you have deployed onto your cluster. So this actually tells you which control plane you have currently running in your cluster. And then gateway route timeouts, I talked about that earlier, but basically adding a timeout policy to the routes property in the gateway resource, and you can configure custom timeout settings for your gateway routes. It gives you control over request handling, adds flexibility for long-running HTTP calls like LLM or AI type calls. And then I mentioned this earlier as well, deploying Radius applications to Azure container instances. This is now available as well. We built support for Azure container instances hard-coded into kind of core Radius and not using the compute extensibility approach that we're actually actively building now. So you can use Radius to deploy to Azure container instances and then today, and then in the near future, we'll release features where we move that into a more extensible model where you can bring your own recipes to customize what you want to do with your ACI deployments. Because right now in the hard-coded approach that we have available, Radius makes some decisions for you in terms of like what kind of Azure gateway to use, what kind of settings and network policies to use. In the future, when we make that extensible and customizable, those would be, you'd be able to influence those via the resource type and the recipes. And then, of course, we talked about this extensively in the previous community meeting, customizable Radius resource types, that's available today. And you can go check out how to use that feature in the blog post that I showed earlier. And then one more thing before we jump into demos is I wanted to point you to the Good First issues. So these are the links to our Good First issues in the 2 Radius repos. These are great places to go if you're interested in contributing to Radius, but maybe you've never contributed to Radius or you're new to kind of Golang or the cloud native space. Great place to go pick up your first issue. Radius first issues, the first link is in the core Radius repo. So that's everything in the Radius control plane, and the Radius CLI is housed in this repo. And then rad dashboard first issues is all the is our repo for the Radius dashboard that's built on top of Backstage. So very cool if you would like to learn more about front-end development or you're more into front-end development. And bonus if you're also interested to learn about Backstage, like the Radius dashboard is built on Backstage. So the rad dashboard for good first issues, and generally the issues in there will all be dealing with fixing Radius code, or Radius backstage code, I should say. All right, so with that, I will hand the mic over to Zach, who will walk us through a demo of Radius resource type connections.
Thank you, Will. I am going to demo today a new feature for Radius resource types around connections and how the connections are handled with containers, specifically environment variables. So let's take a look at a simple application definition. This is pretty much similar to what you would just get out of the rad init. It's just a container and a gateway. I'm going to add to this a database. So let's resource db Postgres resource type. And I will say name is db. I'm hitting control space to do the type ahead and IntelliSense. And I need to add an application, that is to-do list.id. And the environment, that is a parameter. And then the last one is size. If we mouse over that, what do we get? Small, medium, large, XL. So I will say size is small. We'll save that. And well, I was about to deploy it, but wait, how does my container know about this database? Well, used to, we would go in on the container and add a bunch of properties for the environment variable. That's the port. There we go, right here. And I'm going to paste that. A bunch of environment variables. If you've done Kubernetes or anything, Docker, this is pretty common. Let's save that and we'll deploy it. Rad deploy. Give it a second. Okay, let's copy that and we'll open it in our browser. So here is the demo application. And you see here that here are the environment variables I manually added as a developer. Well, the new feature is that's no longer required. And so we're doing some extra work for the developers. Let me show you. Let's now in Radius, these are all dynamically created based upon connections. So we can zap that. And then let me make sure I'm at the right spot. It's not on the container block, but we're going to add a connections. You've seen connections before. And I'm going to call mine PostgreSQL. And the source is db.id. That's my database. Now, if I go and deploy this again, after I took out the environment variables, go back to the terminal, and I'll do rad deploy one more time. Okay, let's refresh on our browser. And we're still going to see the PostgreSQL, but this time, oh, they're still there, even though I didn't manually add them. So Radius is actually doing that for the developer. What it's doing is it's creating a connection, an environment variable named, they're all named connection. They're all named for the connection name. And if I go back over to the application definition, that connection name is PostgreSQL. And now, and then it's all of the properties of the connected resource type, including all the ones before: host, recipe, port, database, username. But I got some new ones like hello Radius community. And where the heck did this come from? Well, let's trace it all the way through. So let's go look, first of all, at the resource type definition. So all the way back to how the platform engineer set this up. So here's the types.yaml, and this is the Postgres type. Here's my description. And then the rest of this is an open API spec. We have all these properties. Those all look familiar. Password, we can close that down. And I've added hello radius community. So there I added it in the YAML. And then as a platform engineer, what I did was rad resource type create. I created the type. And then after that, the type is created. So we can do rad resource type show and give it the type. And you'll see that I've added it. You see it here too. So radius is taking from the API for this resource type and automatically creating those environment variables based upon the properties of any connected resources. Well, what if I don't like that? So as a developer, if I don't like that, no worries. I can keep my connection on there. That tells Radius about dependencies and it builds the application graph. But if I don't like it, I can hit control space again and disable default environment variables. I'll just set that as true. Go back to the terminal and we'll do another rad deploy. Okay, that's deployed. Let's go back to our browser. We'll hit refresh. And great. So no environment variables were created. That's because I disabled them. So there you go. That is dynamically created environment variables based upon radius resource type connections. It's kind of a mouthful, isn't it? Anyways, automatically created environment variables. It's pretty neat. All right. Thank you. Back to you, Will.
Sounds good. So the next demo, I will hand over to Shruti, who will show us Application.Core resource extensibility.
Yeah, thank you. Let me share my screen really quick. So like Will was talking about earlier, right now we have built-in support in Radius for ACI specifically. But as we've been talking more about compute extensibility and making sure that we can add additional platform support in addition to ACI, we've kind of been rethinking the way that we're approaching our extensibility model. And so instead of adding hard-coded support for each of these different platforms like ACI or eventually things like ECS and other serverless models, we've shifted to actually using UDTs to define some of these built-in Radius resources as a way to support other serverless runtimes. So this demo is just going to be showing a Radius resource type using the built-in Radius container. And then we'll deploy a container to ACI, and we'll also deploy a container to Kubernetes using the same application definition. The only difference is that now instead of using like an applications.core container, we're using a built-in Radius resource type as a container. So I'm going to go to the types.yaml first. So this is the definition for my new container. Again, this is just like basically a Radius container. We're just defining it through a Radius resource type. So I have all of the same properties on this this new container that I do on a Radius container. So I have like the environment, application, image definitions, environment variables, commands. So all of these type definitions and schemas it'll be like a one-to-one mapping of what there is on a Radius container now. And one more thing to note is that we're now adding support for recipes. So because we want to deploy to Kubernetes and we want to deploy through ACI, as opposed to changing the container definition or changing the environment compute, to be Kubernetes or ACI like we do now, we're just gonna support that through recipes. So I can register recipes to my environment based off of ACI or Kubernetes, and my application definition is not going to change. So I have my application definition here. I have a to-do list application, and then my front-end container is using this this sample container definition in my types.yaml. And I have my resource extension published to this hollow core zip file. And so this is where all my schemas are getting pulled from. If you look in my bicep config, I now have another extension registered here that has that new container definition. And the naming of this doesn't necessarily matter. This is just like a sample naming, but eventually it'll get packaged into the base Radius resources. So let's go back to the container definition. I'm going to start with deploying a Kubernetes recipe. So I'm going to go ahead and register this recipe to my environment. And this recipe is extremely simple. It's just creating a Kubernetes container. So we'll have a deployment, and that's about it for now. So I have that recipe registered. I'm just going to do a rad deploy to-do list. To-do list dot bicep, and then that shouldn't take too long, and it should end up getting deployed. We can switch over to, and we'll just wait a couple seconds for this to deploy. I'm not expecting it to take that long. Okay, awesome. So I'm going to switch over to my default to-do list application. And if we look at my deployments, you can see that there is a front-end deployment here from that Kubernetes-centric recipe that I had deployed. So now I'm going to deploy an ACI-specific recipe that's going to end up deploying a container instance in Azure. And just to preface, I have all of my workload identity credentials set up on my cluster right now. Because this is deploying to Azure, that would be a prerequisite. So just keep in mind if you're going to be deploying anything to Azure, just make sure you have the correct setup on your cluster in order to do that. So I'm going to switch which recipe I have registered to my environment. Instead of doing the regular Kubernetes container, I'm going to switch it to this ACI container recipe. So if we look at this recipe, you can see I have a container group defined here. The name of my container group is my container group. It has a single container called my container. And then just some other like very, very basic setup properties on here. The details of this don't really matter. It's just to show that it's going to get spun up, as well as some output objects and properties that, in theory, if I wanted to, my base container would be able to access and use. Okay, so now that I have that recipe registered, I'm going to do another deploy. And I have not changed anything in my to-do list.bicep file as I'm deploying these two recipes. So all of this is staying the same. The only difference is I'm changing the underlying container infrastructure that's getting deployed. So now if we go to the portal, once this deploys, we should be able to see an ACI instance spun up. Hopefully, okay, awesome, that was quick. Switch over to the portal, just refresh really quick. Yeah, and you can see that the my container group container instance is here, and then I can just look at it more. Here's the my container, or the actual container named my container that got spun up with the sample application. So this is a lot easier than having to build in support for every single compute platform, because all I did was define a recipe for that compute platform as opposed to having like built-in support on the back end. So we have found that this is just a way more seamless way to integrate extensibility into Radius. And it gives the user a lot more flexibility over what they're deploying, because you can define what's in this recipe and set it up exactly how you want it to, as opposed to it needing to be supported in the Radius backend. Yeah, and then a couple other things to mention. I know Zach was planning to demo connections. So if you wanted to have a connection to something like a gateway resource, for example, um, it works very similarly to how we do it today with connections. You just add a connections block and add a like linking to your gateway resource. Um, yeah, that part is still in progress because we're still looking at how to do like recipe to recipe connections. So stay tuned for when we have support for that. But hopefully we should be able to demo that soon as well. Um, yeah, that was about it. Please let me know if there's any questions on this or if there's anything that you would like to try out as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Shruti. Very cool demo. And as Shruti mentioned, makes extensibility so much easier. So you can imagine, in the very near future, we'd be able to implement other platforms like AWS ECS, for example, or maybe even Azure Container Apps relatively easily in the future, because all you'll need to do is develop the recipes that will drive whatever the core container resources will be. Super exciting. All right, so with that, we've come to the end of our community meeting. Just a reminder to go engage with us on Discord, go to our GitHub repo, give it a star if you are so inclined, or if you haven't already. Join the Google group for the latest Radius news. As I said, it's only 2 emails at most per month, one for the community meeting invite and one for release notes. And note that we'll be back soon with our next community call day. Should be next month, second Tuesday of next month. And give us feedback on all these channels if you have any suggestions on how we can improve things or want to see certain features within Radius or want to contribute to Radius as well.